And so Vinnie is going to share his paper, and Vinnie has a PowerPoint, right? So I think you should be able to share that. And I'm going to turn it over to Vinnie, and then we'll be able to interact after his presentation with him.
Wonderful. Is it pulled up for y'all?
Yep.
Wonderful. All right. So when we got this project or paper handed to us, I interpreted some of the guidelines in there in a way that I guess I'm more creative. So I wanted to find something, an approach that fit me. And so I decided to do a summary of Genesis 1 through 11. And I want to use it in a way that was going to be able to, I can get some more mileage out of it with some of the other ministries that I do, and just interactions with people. I'm constantly sending people to my blog and always mentioning about it. So that was kind of the goal behind that. And that's what we've been doing on Sam Sundays, is going through at least for me in the beginning, was excruciatingly slow pace of going through each chapter and each verse and bringing out the major themes. And it really wasn't until we got to the end of these 11 chapters that I really started to get into it. And I really enjoyed milking these texts for what they are. And it's been really fun. I just enjoy it. So the personal goals I have with this, to provide a life-giving summary of Genesis 1 through 11 that takes the focus off the literal, scientific, or historical arguments that surround the text. Another goal was to integrate Woodland Hills teachings along with other church teachings, personal insights I've had in my lifetime into the summary, and then to summarize 1 through 11 in a way that's accessible, like a high school level readers for my blog. And then here's some of the different subject headings I went through. I put a little bit too much time into this, but I have the time. So it ended up being 19 pages. I don't know why, but I just lost myself, and I had such a great time. I've spent a lot of time on Genesis 12 onward in the last 6 to 9 months of my own personal stuff before I got into SEM. And so this was really neat to dive into these chapters, because it was something really missing from my own library of writings and stuff. So I'm actually going to go through bits and pieces of, I think there's 15, 14 points, but it probably won't take long, because we all know this stuff after doing some together. And a lot of the stuff was mentioned tonight too, and it's been mentioned week after week. So it should be pretty straightforward. I start off in the introduction, and this is from a personal reflection, I guess the most personal of reflective part of this work that I did. And I have to say, the first 11 chapters of Genesis are arguably the most foundational and revelatory chapters of the Bible. They're also the most contested when they're read through a flat reading lens in a 20th first century context. That should be next there. Of the questions that I get all the time, and that we're probably used to: did God create the universe in a literal 6 days, or is it just a literary framework? Must we accept that the earth is only 3,500 years old due to the timeline given in the Bible, tracing back to Genesis? Or is this timeline just simply a God-inspired legend? Was there a literal walking and talking snake who deceived Adam and Eve? Did early mankind have a lifespan of 900 plus years? Did fallen angels have sexual relations with women and create demonic hybrid variations? And so on and so on. There's just a lot of practical questions that come up when people just read the text for what it is. I kind of came up with 3 approaches that I've seen and experienced. First one being, church leaders don't provide any good answers to the questions that are raised in these chapters. So then Genesis becomes confusing. It creates uncertainty, and many times it can lead to a loss of faith. Another approach is church leaders, this might be on the more liberal side, they challenge or deny that there's any divine inspiration at all. Genesis is more fluff or a product of man. It holds nothing of value. So just focus on loving people like we see Jesus doing. And the texts are just kind of ignored. Another approach I saw, and this one's gets to my heart, church leaders put forth that Genesis is inspired and literal. that Genesis is God's perfect word in that it reveals all truth, including truths related to science, history, or anthropology, even when those conclusions, the Bible conclusions, contradict with modern discovery in science. And I grew up in the latter, and just a little example, I found some of my old Ken Ham Answers in Genesis books in my dresser down there. And I was never a Bible thumper, but, I definitely was persuaded to go down this road to learn about some of the different answers, as the Answers book, about different things. And definitely was a young earther, definitely was, well, maybe I wasn't, but I was definitely not an evolutionist at all. And of course, when people would have a differing opinion of that, maybe a creation over time, slow change, or that we evolved, or some of the maybe some of the contents of Genesis isn't literal. The responses are, you're just wrong because God said it, or you're a liberal, or you're a heretic. That's basically the opinion of that. So I grew up on that, and it was a interesting way to live, put it that way. But I think there's a fourth way. I know we say third way a lot of times, but I think there's maybe a fourth way. And how would the original writers, readers, hearers of the text understand it in their context? How would they have understood it in their context? And what are the main points when Genesis is compared to the grand narrative of the whole Bible? And in what way did Jesus and other New Testament writers use the text from Genesis 1 through 11? And in my opinion, they used it in a way that brought life to the revelation of Jesus, and they didn't do it in a way to advocate indisputable concrete head knowledge. And so I think three better questions to bring into this text are, what implications does the text of Genesis 1 through 11 bring into the lives of those who are following Jesus today? How does it impact us? If it doesn't impact our lives, if we read this book and it doesn't do anything towards making a change in your life, I don't think there's any point in it. Another good question is, how does understanding these God-breathed, inspired texts enhance our relationship and depth of intimacy with Christ? Or what do these stories tell us about the nature of God and the relationship he has with us that will bring us to bear more Jesus-like fruit in our lives? I think those are the better questions. And it's weird to quote myself. As I'm putting excerpts, I'm like, it's weird. I've never quoted myself. But anyways, I say whether or not these events took place in actual history is irrelevant, for at least for this study. We affirm that Jesus was a real person and that he and his earlier followers used the contents from Genesis 1 to 11 to further help us be transformed into his image and likeness. And we're going to seek to do the same. So, presenting the summary of the summary. And I realized I'm doing a summary of a summary, which is weird, but it made me laugh. So I had to put that slide in there. Okay, in the beginning, and we talked about some of the stuff already, but we'll just a little high-level overview again. It shows that the Spirit is hovering over the waters and creates the earth from Genesis 1-2. And I really liked from Sem, I think Kevin said this maybe in the first week or two, we're not given any knowledge about God or his nature prior to the opening of Genesis. And that just blew me away. Just that one thing. I thought, you know what, that's true. We tend to open this book and we just, especially from a non-believer or someone who's not familiar with the text, we just start first page and we bring all these ideas about who God is already into the text. And that's why I think how we started about with the centrality of Christ and knowing him first, and that he sets our only example of who God is, and then bringing that backwards into the text is it's just a revolutionary way of understanding this. So I was drawn into that. The rest of this little quote says, however, over the first two chapters of Genesis, the text reveals that this is a God who is intimately involved with his creation. God is carefully and intentionally making each element of creation throughout a 6-day process. And we see that because it says God forms man out of the dust of the ground and breathes life into his nostrils from Genesis 2:7. And I think it was Emily that maybe said this when we were doing some sharing, but this, I really just saw this image, whoever was sharing this, but the next quote says, just imagine God gently scooping dust into his hands, sculpting a human being into his image carefully and combining all the earthly elements in just the right way he wants them, and then pressing his lips up against the face of this fragile, mortal being to breathe and bring forth a living soul. The description of this process drips with tenderness, intimacy, and loving care. Humankind is very precious to God. And we mentioned this again tonight. Creation is finished. Everything is perfect and very good. There's no lack. There's no fear. And there's no bloodshed, nor death. There's no domination, force, or coercion over between creatures. Creation is it's just harmoniously in complete peace. And when Kevin was sharing that clip from Madagascar, I haven't seen that tonight, but I was just in tears because I'm just watching. I got a bunny. I got 2 bunny rabbits, and I'm watching that little bunny hop, and then bam, he's just taken away. And the little duckling that gets taken by the alligator. I mean, I just got to my heart, and I was just a mess. And I grew up in a church that was really strong on about the coming kingdom of it coming in back into the earth, that the earth is going to be restored. So I grew up singing about how the lion's going to lay down with the lamb, and you can put your hand in the snake's hole, and it's not going to bite you. All these different things, and so whenever I think about that imagery, it's just so beautiful to me. And we did a lot of readings that summarized this whole concept of God's dominion, his reign, as shown in the Garden of Eden, as being shalom. I spell it with an O because there's a couple Jewish places in town that I play guitar at the Shalom West and East. They're senior living places, and they're always like, it's Shalom with an O. And so I don't know what's right or wrong, but I have to put that on my invoices. So that's why it says with an O. But that's how we identify this is God's tangible rule and reign, his shalom. And I use that term throughout the rest of the paper. And that's a really awesome SEM concept that, again, just saying that earth was perfect doesn't seem to really sum it up. Saying that shalom is just a much more broader term that includes so many more things. Created with purpose. God creates mankind and sets apart him from all other creatures. He does this by giving them the defining characteristic of sharing in his very own image or likeness, an attribute that would be unique only to humankind. And we talked about in SEM how that's distinctly different than all the other ancient Near East and world religions, where a lot of the religions, man is created to serve. But we see in the Genesis account that man is created to not just to serve, but to co-labor. They're partners. A lot of the other creation texts talk about, mankind are lower beings. If I remember right from my world religions, I think the Japanese religion talks about like the 2 gods puked out, they just puked them out. And that's how the world and mankind got created, by vomit. But that's not how we see God creating. We're not beings with intellect and reasoning capabilities, but authority and responsibility. And then we bear his image. So those are just really key characteristics that make our creation story and Yahweh really unique amongst the rest of the world. God bestows 2 more gifts upon humankind: responsibility and choice. Responsibility of the garden, dominion over the earth and all that's in it, childbearing to continue to populate the world with more image bearers. So there's responsibility there. And then free choice. They get to act in their own recognizance. They're autonomous to act in accordance with God's wishes or not. And I've heard, I think Greg maybe has used this before. I don't know. I think it might be a C.S. Lewis quote. I didn't quote it perfectly because I couldn't find it, but I just love this idea that God is all powerful, but the greatest act of sovereignty he displays in creating agents. It's in creating agents that can say no to him. So yes, his greatest sovereignist shining moment is that he created people that can say no to him. That to me is just so beautiful, and it represents exactly what he shows us in the creation story. Evil lurks nearby. I wish I had some music I could undertone dark music. But Genesis 1:2, Paul kind of, when he was teaching this, points out there's some nebulous darkness over the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. So there's something going on that very possibly that readers from the ancient Near East, the context would have probably identified this as, hey, there's more than one player going on in the universe. God places Adam and Eve in the garden with a task to keep it. While this word can be easily passed off as merely meaning to cultivate or to tend or cut the cucumbers and whatever. I did look it up. Strong's Concordance describes this Hebrew word translated as keep, also carrying the connotations of to hedge about, as with thorns, like guard wire around a prison, to protect and preserve. So there's definitely an element of protection from something. The last heading here says the creation text shows that there was more than one player in the cosmos. We do not yet know how it got there, but we do know that there is something more going on with the story. And then evil succeeds. We know the fall of man in the garden. An enemy appears in the garden, the serpent, which we know is later identified as Satan, the devil, from Revelations. I wrote, God revealed himself to Adam and Eve in many ways: sovereign creator, an intimate maker, the originator of peace and harmony, provider, sustainer, and friend. However, Adam and Eve did not rely on their relationship with God to discern or understand the serpent's remarks. They did not go back and ask God if what the serpent was saying was true and trustworthy. They did not ask God for wisdom or for an explanation. Instead, they made a judgment call purely out of their own limited human understanding of the circumstances and decided to eat of the forbidden tree. They assessed the situation and made a conscious choice apart from trusting in God and what God had lovingly spoken to them for their own protection. Deciding what was right in their own eyes was the first sin. The result of that initial sin was that they ate from the forbidden tree. And I think that goes with a lot what we were talking about a couple of weeks ago in SEM, where we operate in pictures in our mind. And a lot of times we already have a picture in our mind of what this potential choice might do. And that leads us to the choice. And so the sin is really already happening before we even act it out. And that's a pretty powerful thing, because that means if we can get the right picture in our mind, that's probably going to help us prevent ourselves from getting in trouble. The consequence. Once Adam and Eve's choice was made, they unleashed a massive self-inflicted curse, a curse that the biblical narrative shows perpetuating down through their children, children's children, and through every generation of human beings on earth. Shalom is utterly disrupted. Next, we see the curses that come that God either prescriptively gives or descriptively gives. I know some of them seem more descriptive, other are prescriptive. I tend to see it as more just descriptive. I think these were self-inflicted wounds. And I know there's a lot of scholarly debate on that, but I kind of took that position as I was writing this, and you can read more about that if you ever want to read it. But God's presence remains no matter what these curses are, as he's right there in the garden searching for them. Where are you? And seeing that sin and destruction had now entered into the heart of man, God blocks access to the tree of life. The couple are ushered out of Eden toward the east. That's another thing we talked in Sam, away from God's garden. And the east keeps coming back as being a symbol of being away from God and his presence and his shalom. But we need not necessarily interpret this ushering out of Eden as punishment. This is an act of loving kindness and mercy. For to be eternally nourished by a tree of eternal life in a world filled with evil, darkness, and destruction that never ends is nothing less than a description of hell itself. It is by blocking the tree of life that God prevents humans from suffering an eternal hell. Of course, that's opinion, but that's something that I've heard in other teachings from other ministries, and I think that might be a more positive way to look at the banishment, the ushering out of Eden. But that's that. The caveat. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. We had the scripture come up tonight, it comes up a lot. And I've read different papers on whether or not some people argue that that's not even talking about the Messiah. We shouldn't be using that verse. And I've been really relying a lot more heavily on Genesis 12 and the calling of Abraham and the different chapters where it talks about the offspring there. But we're kind of hard with it at SEM, and I love it. And it was really fun to go back and reaffirm this verse. And so we know that this offspring would come through the human childbirth from the birth of one who had not yet been born. Restoration of God's shalom would come, but it would lie somewhere in the future. Question, was relationship lost after Eden? That's how we're usually taught after a kid. They're banned from the presence of the Lord, and God can't be around sin, and he can't stand us, and get away. And I write, sin has pushed humans eastward, away from Eden, in a direction which begins to be understood as moving away from God's shalom and outside the natural goodness and protection that comes with God's rule and reign. But despite the move eastward, God has not abandoned or left them in the slightest. God has shown me with Cain before and after Cain murders his brothers, in those scripture references there. He tells Cain, hey, sin's lurking at your door, you got to master this. Cain kills his brother, and then God's right there going, what are you doing? You know, your brother's blood is just crying out from the earth. He was there the whole time. At least that's the meta narrative. That's just the story that we can take from this. Cain tries to blame his consequences on God. Again, God kind of delivers these curses that are going to come, and I think that they could be interpreted as descriptive, not prescriptive. Cain claims that he's the one getting moved away from God's presence. But what could be the most telling point of the story, Cain's narrative finishes up with this verse. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So it kind of tells you who walked away from who. It's true to say that humankind's relationship with God was severely impacted due to sin. This is undeniable. But what we are starting to see is that in the Genesis narrative is that sin is the thing that pushes people away from God. It is sin that alienates us from God, not God who alienated himself from sin. And if we were to sum up the rest of the Bible going forward, God's story to humankind is his loving efforts to bring them back to himself and back to his loving kindness despite their sin. I really enjoyed another passage from a book that I read, I think that Greg put out, talks about it was the openness of God. I don't think Greg was a participant, the John Sanders one, but it talks about the object of reconciliation was on man, I think, if I'm saying that right. I mean, God's trying to bring us back. He's not when Jesus died on the cross, the reconciliation wasn't so that way God could come to us. We were the objects. He's trying to get us back. And the Genesis narrative is showing that clearly, chapter after chapter, that, where are you? Where have you gone? What are you doing? And you're walking away from me. Go as fast as I can, because I know we're a lot of time. Evil, sin, self-centeredness, distrust, spill out. Lamech comes on the scene, a descendant of Cain, and he starts to justify his murder. God's grace that was given to Cain is seen as an approval for violence. But the message of God's shalom is clear. Sin, revengeful retaliation, violence, and death were never manifestations of God's kingdom. They were never or not present in God's beautiful garden, nor were they present in God's responses toward humankind's rebellion. God didn't come down with a club. He didn't do anything to harm us or hurt us. And despite our sin, there was no consequence there that was against our persons. Powerful. The going thought in Lamech's day must have been, sure, murder is bad, but justified murder is not as bad, or at least not as bad if someone did evil to me first. This twisted view of justice via redemptive violence, is not the view that would later be taught and exemplified by God's Son Jesus and his followers. Turn the other cheek, do not repay evil for evil or reviling for reviling, but on the contrary, bless. Nor is it the view that God had imprinted on the writers of Genesis who were inspired to write the narrative of the patriarchs. Lamech's story is included in the text to remind us that God is not in favor with violence, even when it seems justified. This text is just showing us that sin is getting worse and worse and worse. Creation's falling into disarray. God describes the state of humanity as every intention of their hearts being only evil continually. Furthermore, the text says the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. Oh, and God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth. The Bible doesn't give any description of what was actually taking place on earth when evil was at its worst, but we do know that mankind's thoughts were evil continually, and violence was everywhere. To express the gravity of the situation, Genesis 6:1-4 even goes as far to say that possibly demons were impregnating human women and creating some sort of hybrid Nephilim human-like offspring, something that would have raised a giant red flag to those in the ancient Near East relating to the topic of cosmic evil. Whether the passage about the Nephilim is to be taken literally or not, the narrative is overtly conveying to the ancient Near East reader or hearer that God's creation was incredibly corrupted, and not being corrupted by humans alone, but even by cosmic personalities of darkness. The devil was just as much involved with the earth's decline as human sin was. The flood, just as in Genesis 1-2, the ancient concept of powerful waters that represented cosmic level forces who were out of line with God's harmony and peace and hell-bent on destruction and suffering. They're also paralleled in the story of Noah. And there's some other references in Job and the Psalms about the sea creatures and the powerful sea and only God. These waters are not seen as working by directive or in concert with God. They are his opponents. Powerful, yes, but able to be subdued by God and him only. The text even says that God is the one doing the flooding of the earth. But knowing that the waters symbolize independent, opposing forces of evil, we must take into account that these evil forces were already in a state that was driven toward the destruction of God's peace and harmony. Waters are independent agents exercising their free agency to work contrary to God's purposes. We must understand God's warning of a coming flood to mean that opposing cosmic forces of evil are going to befall the earth. And if there was going to be a literal global flood, it would be these anti-God cosmic forces doing the actual destroying, not God. Therefore, the warning of a flood should not be understood as God succumbing or using these forces to bring about good for a higher heavenly purpose. The warning can instead be understood as God moving away in a retreat from the current battle with evil and retreating to higher ground in an effort to save his beloved creation. Just as Noah's ark eventually came to rest on higher ground after the destructiveness of the flood. A retreat isn't necessarily a sign of weakness, nor is it an implication of an inadequacy of power. Retreats are used as a strategic response in warfare to regroup, refocus, and remobilize one's efforts toward the enemy in a more effective manner. That's at least how I tried to look at the text. Grieved to his heart. You don't see anger. In fact, in our studies, I don't find God ever being angry until Exodus 3 when he calls Moses, and Moses, how is this going to happen? I can't do it. And then God's, I'm getting angry with you. You don't trust that I can do it. That doesn't even come in the God's anger isn't even in the patriarchs, I don't think. But he's grieved grieved to his heart. God pulls away from the battle to let evil receive its own destruction upon itself. Yet in desiring to continue his plan of human redemption and reconciliation to himself, God works through Noah's family to restart a special lineage. A lineage that had retained faith in God, who remained faithful to him, and possessed a small remnant that sought after God's shalom. God instructs Noah to build an ark of salvation to save a remnant of humankind. And it's through this remnant that God would be able to bring the offspring, back from Genesis 3:15, that would eternally bruise the heel of the monster of the sea, the serpent who invaded Eden, and rescue mankind from the destruction and evil that sin brings upon the earth. This is God's ultimate intention in bringing the flood. After the flood, evil remains. Noah's drunkenness and his nakedness. He gets wasted, and then and the nakedness thing happens. God's retreat, regrouping, and the flood that ensued did next to nothing to combat the rule of and reign of sin. This is one of my favorite sentences. If God was trying to wipe out sin, then he didn't do a very good job, because that sin came right back. But that wasn't the point of the flood. The flood merely preserved a lineage of humans who would be able to continue the succession of God's plan of redemption through faith. Sin was unaffected by the effects of the flood. God even concedes of the fact that the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. And he says that after the flood. Noah is found to be walking righteously with God before the flood, but just as we saw in the examples with Adam and Eve, Cain and Lamech, the Genesis story continues to reveal that God's loving kindness toward us does not seem to be based upon our acts of righteousness. Not to say that putting faith in God doesn't lead a person to acting righteous, but faith towards him does not necessarily take away the impulse and natural gravitation to sin. That wouldn't come until the born again new man, which we haven't got to yet. God remains faithful to sinners, but the sin that organically arises from within us continually pushes us away from his shalom. With the flood over, the repopulation of the earth started, with human sin and cosmic evil continuing its benevolent rule over humans. Noah's descendants spread out across the earth and are listed out one by one in the Table of Nations of chapter 10. In Babel, the text opens with saying that the whole earth had one language and the same words, and people migrated from the east. As they migrated, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. The descendants of Noah continued to go eastward, away from their ancestral land of Eden, away from God's presence, away from God's perfect shalom. Fallen human beings continue to walk in an opposite direction of God. They build a city, and the residents were not looking to have God build them a name or looking to build God's beautiful name through them. They were seeking to establish a name for themselves. They were seeking to set themselves up on the earth as a combined, independent city force separated from God and his directives. Additionally, notice that they set out to build a tower with its top to the heavens. Places also referred to as high places throughout the Old Testament. The Israelites kept putting these high places and these foreign gods and idols and stuff. To those in the ancient Near East, high places were regarded as locations where the gods dwelled. The city's inhabitants set out to build their own mountain and perhaps maybe something like a ziggurat, such as to create their own god or to bring one of the gods down to them. Their self-sufficiency was pushing out the need for God's own presence and sustainability. And the narrative shows God's coming down from heaven to look at this city and at the tower that human made without him, and seeing that humans' unity towards self-sufficiency would leave nothing outside the realm of possibility. They'd have greater sins, greater destruction, moving farther and farther away from dependence on God. He breaks up their shared common language and introduces new languages. This leads to confusion among the people, and the tower is abandoned. The text leads us to speculate that the people with common languages band together and set out with one another, migrating to various places on the earth. Humanity is finally spread out on the earth as God had wished all along since Eden. But God's shalom is absent, and the world is a far cry from the beauty and love God desires. Finally, we get to the end. The creation stage is set for God's plan of ultimate restoration. The world's been created. God's intentions for shalom are expressed in his beautiful creation of peace and harmony. Humanity gives place to sin, and God's enemy forces and God's shalom is severely disrupted. Violence and destructive conditions on the earth brings cause for God's retreat and regrouping from the evil, and the chaotic cosmic waters result in a catastrophic flood. A faithful remnant of humankind is preserved, and finally God's remnant is scattered abroad into multiple languages and languages across all the earth. And we know from Greg's favorite verse that he wrote in Acts 17, we learn that Paul viewed that God, that he did that hoping that they would grope for him and somehow find him. So the spreading out of the nations wasn't to split people up to harm them, but it was to help them find and hopefully come to know him. This little sidebar says the biblical story will now return to the redemptive promise made back in Genesis 3:15, the promise of the final defeat of God and humankind's cosmic foe, the serpent, the devil, and the restoration of God's shalom. Sin and Satan's defeat must now come to pass, but we know nothing about how, what methods, what this will look like, and when it's going to be accomplished. All we know is that a future offspring is coming. It's not till Genesis 12 that we begin to understand and see how God's going to accomplish this. And as a spoiler alert, God would be selecting one person of faith from the faithful descendants of Noah and Adam and Eve to build a unique nation of faith. Through this nation, God would bring his promised offspring that would defeat Satan, his evil kingdom, and bring freedom from sins and restoration of the world. This would all start in chapter 12 with the calling of a man named Abram, later called Abraham. Abraham is far away from Eden, about as far away east from Eden as the Bible's geographic land narrative covers. He's way in the Ur of the Chaldeans. The message is clear. Abraham's family couldn't be any farther from God and his perfect Eden that stood in the west. Therefore, what is the first thing that God speaks to Abraham? God calls him westward, back towards Eden, back to his shalom, and back to full relationship with him. Now, I don't have time to go over my final thoughts and a couple of things, but I did mention that really there's three takeaways you can grab from Genesis 1 through 11, which is the message. What is the message about God? What's the message about human beings, ourselves? And then what is the message about the world? And obviously, to summarize it, God's a really good God. He's awesome. He loves us. He's relational. He wants us to be with us. He creates us out of love, but he gives us free choice, and we can be within that free choice or not. And he gives us that opportunity to choose. So beautiful gift. With ourselves, we're beloved. We're his crown jewel of creation. But sin has corrupted our good nature. We've become enslaved to sin, and we're not able to defeat it in our own power. That's the message. Even when the cosmic forces in the flood came, evil was still there. It's something that we can't beat, and we need a savior. And the message about the world: God's not alone in the universe. There's cosmic forces of wickedness opposed to him. The world is subject to their influence, but all hope in breaking free from these powers is on God's coming offspring. And the world is going to be restored to God's shalom. And until then, there's going to be an ongoing battle of dominion and control over the earth. Whew. And we got 1 minute left.
Hey, shoot your questions at Vinnie, quick.
Vinnie, this was an outstanding presentation. Just loved it. I had some stuff in there. I had that whole eastward to westward thing. I hadn't noticed that before. So I love the way you set the motif. Who are some of the people that most influenced you? Have you read Terence Freidheim or commentaries that influenced you? Or how much was this original to you?
As far as gosh, that's hard to really gauge, like a percentage wise. I come from such a unique story where I've lived as a culty Christian under Armstrongism, with Herbert W. Armstrong, the Worldwide Church of God. So a lot of that was foundational. This is what we studied. And then I became an evangelical. So, I was an expert at all the evangelical stuff. And then I became a charismatic word of faith person. So I know that perspective, and there's a lot of teaching about that in there. And then now I'm hearing this crazy Anabaptist thing. So it's just a lot of teachers.
All right. You put it together very, very well.
I'll just echo that, Vinnie. This is great stuff. Really, really good. Teasing out details, and then just the pastiche of the narrative you then walk us through. Really, really enjoyed it.
Well, that's a credit to what Kevin's been doing with Sam and you guys. I mean, everything's laid out so well. It was so easy to digest and then regurgitate. Just because the way you've got the curriculum. So it's back at you guys.
I love Paul using that word pastiche. That's awesome. I don't think I know how to use that in a sentence, but
Well, I don't know what it means, but I just said it. It seemed like it would work here.
And itself
Other
is quite
thoughts?
pastiche.
other thoughts for Vinnie? Take a few more minutes here.
Vinnie, you did a whole lot more than just regurgitate on this thing, I'll tell you.
Yeah, that's right. You had a lot of pastiche.
was pretty cool. You're one of the papers I chose to respond on. I had some stuff written out at work today, longhand on my lunch break. So it's just fantastic. Your writing is awesome. I'm like, this is Vinnie, what? And so that's pretty cool. And I like the perspective. I like kind of that feel, let's stop arguing on this side or that side and let's get to the legits of something and live it out, walk it out, and open yourself up to that. And I love that. It's pretty cool.
Awesome.
Oh, he's a nerd without glasses, Charlie says. Uh-oh.
Thank you, Charlie.
Hey, what are you talking about? He's making a comment about people with glasses there, Charlie? What's going on here?
Just compliment. A nerd is one of the highest compliments you can get.
Oh, I must have got that wrong my whole life.
That's what I think anyway.
Awesome. Other
And I
thoughts?
have a lot of time on my hands because of the nature of my job. So I just kind of got out of control as far as how long it was. But
Oh, that's awesome.
it's just I just have a unique situation. I don't have like 8 kids like Clay does, and stuff like that. But it was really fun to be able to put this together. So thanks for the time and handing that over. It was really fun.
Awesome. Any other thoughts? Really excellent job, Vinnie. Other thoughts or questions? We'll just take another minute or two here. So good. Spellbinding. Yeah, I'd encourage you all to read the full version if you haven't on the SEM site and read each other's stuff too. There's some really, really great stuff out there. And Vinnie, yeah, this is a really excellent summary and even an excellenter summary of the summary. But really fabulous. You put things in your own words, and like somebody said, you're a really excellent writer. And Paul, I'm just going to try to use that word pastiche. You put so much pastiche in it. I'm probably misusing that word, but really good job. You can teach this stuff, man. You can teach this stuff.
Thanks.
And I don't know, you mentioned your blog, and I know probably everybody else is aware that you are a blogger. And so check out some of Vinnie's other writings there, because he is a really, really gifted writer and thinker. And Charlie's telling me that pastiche is a French word. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean pastries, does it? Charlie, what does it mean?
I think Vinnie put some real panache in his pastiche.
Panache.
Charlie, what does pastiche mean?
What I know, I see it's kind of imitation of style.
Oh,
Yeah.
right. You're styling, Vinnie. You're
Yes.
styling. All right. So the last question for tonight then is, who wants to follow that act and go next week?
Good luck.
Oh no, you guys are so creative. It's going to be
We've
awesome.
got the talent here. We've got the talent. We've got the chops. Marie, is that a yes?
Yeah, I'll go
Awesome.
as long as you don't compare me.
No
Mine's gonna be
comparisons.
really different though.
No
Awesome.
comparisons. The beauty of this, even as you guys did your life stories, I loved the variety of approaches of how to do it. And each person had their own expressive way of conveying their story. And so I'm sure that'll happen with this midpoint summary as well. So we'll look forward to Marie next week. All right, you guys. Well, thank you. We will, some folks will see you Sunday morning. Have a great rest of your week.
Night, night, everybody.
Night, night, Craig.
Night,
I
night.
hope to see your face next
Yeah,
week.
yeah,
Craig.
hopefully you'll see my face next week. If you can just hold off, be patient.
Okay.
She'll want to
Okay.
see it.
We
Like
saw
early-
enough of it tonight with those yearbook photos, so we're good.
We're gonna be shocked when his real camera comes back on.
I know it.
All right, y'all.
Look at all far. Okay, good night.
Bless you guys.